Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We know you're all here because staying on top of the latest in HIV research is super important to you.
You got it. And if you're already tuned in to the HIV-R NA test guide, you definitely know how crucial it is to have solid information, right? Information you can trust.
Absolutely. So today, we're going to zero in on some really cool stuff, some exciting developments that came straight out of the biggest HIV/AIDS conference in the US.
Yep. This year, it was all happening in San Francisco, kicked off March 9th. You could really feel the buzz in the air, even with all the talk about potential U.S. funding cuts kind of looming in the background.
Right. I remember epidemiologist Wafa El-Sadr and the conference chair, Diane Havlier, brought those points up pretty early on.
They did, but honestly, what really stole the show was the science. Some seriously promising breakthroughs.
For sure. And that's exactly where we're headed today. We will break down the highlights of this conference, especially the amazing progress in two key areas. First up, we'll dive into a potential game changer for HIV prevention. A long-acting injectable pre-WP that could protect you for a whole year.
A whole year, just
Yeah.
wow.
Right. And then we'll explore some fascinating research on some unusual antibodies and how they might be able to control HIV. It's a big step, maybe even towards a cure.
Yeah. So let's start with this long-acting pre-VP buzz. I'm sure many of you are familiar with pre-exposure prophylaxis, or pre-EP. It's been a total game changer when it comes to preventing HIV transmission.
Totally. When people take it consistently, it's
Yeah.
insanely effective.
Absolutely.
But we all know the challenge sometimes is that consistency piece, right?
Mm.
That's why this news about a possible single injection that could ward off HIV for an entire year is so huge. It could make things so much simpler for so many people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, we've already seen how powerful lenacapavir can be. It's that drug that gives you solid protection for 6 months with just one shot. It even snagged the title of Science's 2024 Breakthrough of the Year. Yeah. And now the folks at Gilead Sciences, they've presented some new data that takes us even further.
Okay, so let's dig into this new data. They were looking at a higher dose of lenacapavir, 5 grams to be exact. What did they learn about how long it lasts?
So their study had 40 participants, and get this, after a full year, the amount of the drug in their blood was actually higher than what they saw with the lower dose at 6 months.
Wow.
That's a pretty strong indicator that this higher dose could actually shield you from HIV for a full year. Renu Singh from Gilead, she even commented on how wild it is that such a tiny molecule can hang around and do its thing for so long.
So cool. And it wasn't just the Gilead team who were impressed.
Yeah.
Dr. Douglas Richmond, a super respected virologist from UC San Diego, he called the data very impressive. And this was published in The Lancet too. When you get that kind of praise from the big names in science, yeah, it's a big deal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing they did bring up was that with this higher dose, some people experienced discomfort where they got the shot. It's injected into the gluteal muscle, which is different from those under the skin shots they used before. But Renu Singh mentioned that icing the area can help, plus they're probably looking into ways to lower the dose for future versions. The really important thing is that Gilead's getting ready to launch efficacy trials this year to test these findings with a larger group of people.
Right. So picture this, everyone listening, especially if you've ever thought about PPP or know someone who has a once-a-year shot. What a game changer, right? Think about how much easier it would be to stick with your prevention plan.
Right.
What do you think are the biggest hurdles to getting this out to everyone if the trials go well?
Well, obviously the efficacy data is key, but there's more to it. Cost is a big one. And then will different healthcare systems be able to make it accessible? And will people be on board with an injection they only get once a year? Yeah, all those things come into play. But just the sheer convenience factor, that could be a total game changer. It could help us reach way more people and make sure they stay protected, especially in communities where taking a daily pill just isn't easy.
Makes total sense. But as amazing as all this pre-EP progress is, we got to remember that prevention alone isn't going to end the HIV epidemic, right? The global numbers are still pretty concerning.
Yeah, unfortunately they are. Even with all the advances in prevention, about 1.3 million people got infected with HIV last year. It's a big wake-up call that we're still a long way from hitting that UNAIDS goal they set a few years back.
And the problem seems to be getting worse in certain parts of the world. We're seeing epidemics spreading in places like the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Latin America. That's pretty alarming.
It is. Chris Beyer from the Duke University Global Health Institute, he's pointed out that if we don't come up with a super effective vaccine or a cure, and a vaccine is still a really tough nut to crack, HIV rates will probably keep going up even with more people using pre-PP.
And on top of all that, globally, there are these U.S. funding cuts to PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It's been a lifeline in the fight against HIV and AIDS worldwide.
Right.
But now they're only supporting pre-PEP for pregnant women and breastfeeding women.
Yeah.
And then that sparked a lot of criticism. Beatrice Grinstein from the International AIDS Society, she was really shocked by this change, especially considering how much PEPFAR has done over the years.
Yeah, I can understand that. It really highlights how complicated and challenging it is to keep this fight against HIV going strong on a global scale.
Yeah.
But even with all these roadblocks, the research community, they're not giving up on finding a cure. And there were some really cool developments on that front at the conference.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about that. The idea of curing HIV has been this long-standing dream. What are the main obstacles that scientists are still wrestling with?
The biggest one is this thing called the HIV reservoir. Basically, it's like little pockets of immune cells in a person's body where the HIV virus has snuck its genetic material into the cell's DNA. So even when antiretroviral drugs have gotten the virus down to undetectable levels in the blood, this sneaky virus can still be hiding out in these reservoir cells.
It's like it's dormant.
Exactly. And it can wake up and reactivate if treatment stops.
So it's like the virus is playing hide and seek. And I know researchers have been trying different ways to target this reservoir, right? Like, what about those latency reversal agents? I remember hearing about those.
You're right. For a while now, a big focus has been on creating drugs that can basically kick those dormant viruses out of hiding.
Oh, wow.
The thinking was, if you can wake up those sleeping viruses in the reservoir, they'll start making new virus particles. And then maybe those infected cells will die off, or the immune system will finally see them and be able to wipe them out. The ultimate goal was to shrink that reservoir down so small that the immune system could handle any leftover virus without needing antiretroviral therapy forever.
It sounds great in theory, but it seems like it hasn't been the miracle cure everyone was hoping for. Why hasn't it worked better?
Well, it turns out that viral reservoir is a tough nut to crack. It's not all the same, and the ways the virus stays hidden, they can vary a lot. Plus, just waking up the virus doesn't always mean the infected cell will die or that the immune system will be strong enough to clear them all out. In most cases, when people stopped their antiretrovirals after getting these latency reversal agents, the virus bounced right back, often within weeks.
So that leads us to these new studies on antibodies, specifically broadly neutralizing antibodies, or bNAbs. This seems like a totally different way of going after that reservoir.
It is. Researchers like Stephen Deeks's group at UCSF and others have been looking into the potential of these rare antibodies that come from people whose HIV is well controlled with antiretroviral meds. What makes bNAbs so interesting is that in the lab they've shown they can neutralize a whole bunch of different HIV variants.
You said neutralize instead of just binding, right? Can you break that down for us a little more?
Sure. Imagine this. A lot of antibodies, they can latch onto a virus kind of like a key fitting into a lock. But a broadly neutralizing antibody, it's like a special key. It not only fits the lock, it actually jams it up so the door can't open.
I see.
In this case, that means stopping the virus from getting into new cells and infecting them. This neutralizing action is way more powerful, and it works against different strains of HIV, unlike most antibodies that are kind of picky.
So that makes the potential of bNAbs even more exciting. What have we seen in early trials with people who've received these antibodies?
Well, think about this. If someone with HIV who's got their virus under control with meds stops taking those meds without doing anything else, only about 4% can keep the virus in check after 3 months.
Wow.
But in these early trials where people got bNAbs and then went off their regular meds, the virus stayed undetectable for at least that same period, 84 days, in a much higher percentage of people, somewhere between 10% and 20%. Ole Schmeltz-Sagard from Aarhus University, he said, yeah, it's not a majority, but it's definitely a promising sign that we need to investigate further.
For me, the fact that any significant number of people could keep the virus down without meds for that long is huge. It tells us that these antibodies are doing something right. Either they're going after the virus directly, or they're helping the immune system get a handle on it.
Oh.
And there have been even more impressive results in some of the studies, haven't?
Oh yeah, for sure. Thumbi Dungyu from the Africa Health Research Institute, he presented results from the very first cure study done in Africa. They gave 2 different bNAbs to 20 women, and 4 of them have had undetectable virus for 55 weeks after stopping their meds. That's incredible.
It is.
And even more amazing, one of the participants has been off meds for 2.5 years and still no detectable virus.
Heck.
Dr. Ndungu was saying that a major focus now is figuring out why it worked for some people and not others.
That's incredible. And wasn't there a study in the UK and Denmark that showed even higher rates of people staying virus-free?
Yep.
That's right. That study had 68 participants, and they were randomly assigned to get either 2 bNAbs or a placebo. 20 weeks after everyone stopped all treatment, 75% of the people who got the bNAbs hadn't had the virus come back. Compare that to only 8.8% in the placebo group.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. And after that, most of the folks who got the treatment got a second dose of bNAbs, and get this, 7 of them kept the virus completely under wraps for at least another year. Sarah Fiddler from Imperial College London, who presented the findings, called it extremely unusual. So again, the big question is, why does this work so well for some and not for others?
It sounds like these bNAbs might be doing more than just fighting the virus directly. Are scientists starting to get a handle on how else they might be helping control HIV?
They are. One idea that's gaining traction is called the vaccinal effect. The idea is that when these bNAbs attach themselves to any HIV that tries to make a comeback after treatment stopped, this whole complex can actually rev up the immune response.
Specifically, it can boost the activity of T cells, which are like the hitmen of the immune system taking out infected cells. Dr. Segard even mentioned a case that supports this vaccinal effect. It was a participant in his study who got both a latency reversal agent and bNAbs and has been controlling HIV without meds for over 7 years. It's like the antibodies are teaching the body how to fight the virus better on its own.
Wow, that's so cool. So the antibodies are like a training course for the immune system.
Exactly.
And it's not just the antibodies we give people that matter, right? Some people naturally make their own neutralizing antibodies.
That's right. Mauro Garcia from Johns Hopkins University, he's found that people who naturally produce more of these autologous neutralizing antibodies, or bNAbs, they tend to see a much longer delay in the virus coming back after they stop antiretrovirals. His research suggests that if we measure these bNAb levels in people on treatment, we might be able to figure out who's more likely to keep the virus under control, even off meds.
So it seems like tapping into the power of the immune system is a big part of finding a cure.
Absolutely. Dr. Sugard said it best. He doesn't think there's going to be one magic bullet that leads to a cure after stopping treatment. He thinks the best path forward right now is to figure out ways to enhance immunity.
So to sum things up for everyone listening, here's what we've learned from this deep dive into the latest HIV/AIDS conference. We're seeing awesome progress in prevention with the possibility of a once-a-year injectable PrEP, which could make it way easier and more accessible for people to protect themselves. And in the quest for a cure, research on broadly neutralizing antibodies is showing real promise, even though it's still early days. It looks like we might be able to help people control HIV without having to take pills every day.
Right. And it's super important to remember that there are still some major challenges ahead, especially when it comes to funding and the way the HIV epidemic is evolving around the world. But the scientists out there, they're dedicated and they're coming up with incredible new ideas. It gives us all a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, I agree. And here's a thought to leave you with. What if someday understanding how your own body responds to HIV with its own unique antibodies could help us tailor treatments just for you, or even lead to a cure down the road? The research we talked about today, it opens up some really exciting possibilities. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into these groundbreaking developments. Stay informed, folks. Check out trusted sources like the HIV-RNA test guide, which can hook you up with over 4,500 testing labs across the U.S. if you need testing information.
That's a great resource.
It is. Until next time, everyone.
See ya.